Welcome to Moveable Dough. This is Steve Danielson. I'm a composer, conductor, and music educator. On this podcast, I talk with other composers and discover how they began their journey into composition. Join me each week as we explore their lives, their musical journeys, and of course, their music. To learn more about this podcast and access a complete archive of episodes, including the series of shorter segments called Movable Snippets, visit my website at sdcompose.com/movabledough. Hey, this is Steve. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Moveable Dough. My guest today is Dr. Frank Ticheli. Frank is Emeritus Professor of Composition at the University of Southern California. He has found success and notability in his choral, orchestral, and concert band writing. Frank has also been a guest conductor of his music at Carnegie Hall, at many American universities and festivals, and cities throughout the world, including Beijing and Shanghai, London and Manchester, Singapore, Rome, Sydney, and numerous cities in Japan. In 2018, he received the University of Michigan Alumni Society's highest honor, the Hall of Fame Award, in recognition of his career as a composer. Frank Ticheli, welcome to Moveable Dough.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you have had quite the trail that has led you to where you are today. From Louisiana to Michigan to Texas to California. You've hopped around quite a bit, so I want to start back at the beginning. Tell us about where you grew up and when you started making music.
Sure. Well, yeah, I grew up in Louisiana, my early childhood at least, mostly in South Louisiana near New Orleans. And so my earliest musical memories are largely that sort of traditional jazz that was being played in New Orleans, still is, in fact, today. And my first instrument was a trumpet. My father bought me at a pawn shop right on Bourbon Street, right in the French Quarter. There was a trumpet in the window and a clarinet, and I wanted to play the clarinet. And the clarinet was only $80, but the trumpet was $45. And my dad said, "Sorry, son, you're going to play the trumpet." And so I started out at age 9.
For economic reasons.
Yeah, exactly. $35 decision. I think about that. What if he'd, swung the, paid the extra $35 and got me the clarinet? Would I be playing the clarinet now, not composing? Would I have hated it and I wouldn't even be in music? I don't know. It's one of those forks in the road that we all have, right?
That's right.
So that's my earliest experiences were in South Louisiana as a trumpet player, and then we moved later to Texas.
And were you in like the high school band or the?
Yeah, the public school music was kind of modest there. It wasn't great because it was a small town outside of New Orleans, and not very well funded. A very dedicated teacher with no resources whatsoever. But that's how I started. And then when we moved to Texas, it was a culture shock for me because suddenly I was thrust into this music education program that was beyond my imagination. I had no idea that kids my age could sound that good. I'm an early teenager by this point, and no idea that they could play as well as they could. And also the music that we were playing was so much more interesting and more sophisticated than what I was exposed to in southern Louisiana as a trumpeter. And so it lit this fire that just never went out. From around age 13, 14 years old when we moved there, that's really when I started thinking about making music my life because I got so excited about it.
Is that when you started composing music as well, or did that happen later?
A little bit later. It was still I was in high school and I started composing then. I started getting interested in the idea of writing because I was not only that we were playing this wonderful music, but I wanted to know how do I make a living as a musician, but how do I write music like this music we're playing? As I said, we're suddenly playing these amazing pieces, things like the Hindemith Symphony and the Dahl Sinfonietta, and fun things like Rocky Point Holiday. These are all wind ensemble pieces. And I just wanted to know, how do you write music like this? I started asking people how to do it. And so it was put on my radar around my junior year in high school when I took a theory class, and the teacher told me that, you've got the ears of a composer. You might want to think about composing. So it started around junior year in high school.
That's awesome. So before you decided to become a composer, what did you want to be? When you were a young boy, what was your goal?
Oh God, well, I was a young boy. I was walking in the woods and taking pirogues, going snake hunting and alligators. And, I grew up in the swamp, so I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was just being a young boy. And it wasn't until we moved away from there that I started thinking about other things. There was one other field of interest for me, and that was architecture. And in fact, I was accepted to architecture school as a graduate student, and also accepted to composition at Michigan. So it was either go to Michigan for composition or go to Texas Tech for architecture, and I chose composition. And again, another fork in the road there.
Yeah.
I've gone the other way. You never know.
Yeah, you have the clarinet versus trumpet. You have the Louisiana and Texas, and now you have the um, I've lost my train of thought. Composition or architecture. Yeah.
Which, by the way, are similar. Really, there's so many similarities between the two areas, and the more I get to know architects, the more I realize how similar. Because we're both dealing with structures. We're both trying to reconcile the small with the large, the details, the minute details with the overall structure of the entire thing. We're doing all of that. We're also balancing aspects of predictability and surprise. We're balancing purely artistic concerns with also more practical concerns, usability things, and they're sort of tempering each other and balancing each other. The head and the heart are both kind of keeping each other in check, both for composers and for architects. And so it's similar in so many ways.
Yeah, I'd never made those connections. That's pretty cool. So from 1991 to 1998, you were composer in residence with the Pacific Symphony. Mm-hmm. So how did you get that position, and what were your responsibilities as composer in residence?
Well, I was offered first a position at University of Southern California and actually turned it down. Why? Because LA did not make a good first impression on me. And it doesn't make a good first impression on a lot of people, right? But I respectfully declined the offer. And they said, would you not make that official yet? Can we keep talking? And so I said, okay, we'll keep talking. So we kept talking about it. While we were doing that, I got a separate phone call from Carl St. Clair, conductor of the Pacific Symphony, and of someone I've known for quite a while, because we knew each other from University of Michigan when we were both in our 20s. So now I'm in my 30s, and he calls me and says, Frank, I just took this job. I'm conductor of this young orchestra called the Pacific Symphony in an exciting community, and it's on the move, and there's no end of the possibilities. It's incredible opportunity, and I need a composer in residence. Would you be interested? So now I feel like, okay, California is beckoning me. I think I have to take this seriously. And of course, I was interested in that. And so meanwhile, the negotiations with USC were such that I decided to come. And so I came with two offers, not just one, the Pacific Symphony and the position at University of Southern California. And then the duties at Pacific Symphony were really three different things. One was to sort of screen and recommend pieces by living composers submitting their music or publishers submitting music for performance consideration. That was one part. The second part is to give all the pre-concert lectures. So whatever was being done on it might be Beethoven Third and Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, whatever, I would give a 30-minute lecture before each concert on whatever the music was to the audience. And that was a lot of fun. And then, of course, the third responsibility was to write music. And so I wrote music for the orchestra, and they premiered several pieces. And so I had this wonderful relationship with that orchestra that's still happening. It's ongoing, even though I'm no longer composer in residence. It's sort of a lifelong collaboration that I've had with Carl St. Clair, the conductor of that orchestra. So it was really a gift, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Were you writing like one piece a season or several a season, or what were you doing?
One a season. The first one was a piece called Radiant Voices, 20-minute orchestra piece. And that one Carl took everywhere. After he didn't just premiere it and record it, and perform it several times locally and in the U.S., but he took it all over the world as well. So it was a really wonderful sort of inaugural piece. And then I wrote other things. I wrote a big song cycle called An American Dream for soprano and orchestra. I wrote shorter pieces. I orchestrated things that were originally for winds. I did that as well. And then I also started collaborating with the Pacific Chorale, which is the chorus that's connected to the Pacific Symphony. The conductor at the time was John Alexander, and I wrote my first choral piece, There Will Be Rest, for the Pacific Chorale.
Nice. Nice. So as mentioned earlier, and as you were just talking about, you've found success in choral, orchestral, concert band writing. If you had your choice, though, with unlimited time, unlimited money at your disposal, what would you write? What's sort of like a bucket list piece for you?
Well, this is going to sound like a cop-out to your question, but I would do what I'm doing, which is I love wearing the different hats. I love how my choral music will inform in unexpected ways the orchestral music, which informs in unexpected ways the wind ensemble music, and how they sort of cross-fertilize each other. So I just want to keep doing what I'm doing. I have no real interest in writing for film, for example. People often ask me that because I live here in LA, but I really have no interest in it. I'm nothing against them. Many of my students, quite a few of them, are doing that. Some of them extremely successful at it, and I love that can happen. I'm just not interested in that. I thought about writing. I still think about writing an opera. That's still something on my possible bucket list because I'm interested in a couple of different possibilities for opera.
Okay.
But mostly, I want to just keep doing what I'm doing, which is taking commissions, writing pieces, and wearing the different hats. I can't just be a choral composer or an orchestral composer or a wind composer. I want to do all of it, just to keep it interesting for myself.
Fantastic. I don't think that's a cop out at all. I think that's great. So I saw on your website that you've been taking many of your pieces and arranging them for flex band or flex orchestra.
Oh, yeah.
For those of our listeners that may not be familiar with that concept, can you tell us what that means and why you decided to arrange some of your music this way?
Well, it came from the pandemic. During the pandemic, suddenly young musicians and music education programs all over the country, really all over the world, could no longer meet. You couldn't meet in a room and make music. So we were thinking about, when I say we, I mean myself and other composers in my circle. We started trying to figure out ways we could help music educators in this terrible time of need during the pandemic. And so we started thinking, well, you can't meet in a room, but maybe you could meet with only 6 players spread out over the room. And that's indeed what started happening, right? They would meet, but they would be really spread out. Mm-hmm. And they'd also have masks on and special covers for their bells of their instruments, all kinds of things that they were doing during that horrible time. And so I started a sort of a collective of composers. We called ourselves Creative Repertoire Initiative, CRI. It was 12 of us, and we just started writing these flexible versions of our pieces, which means pieces that can be performed by any number and any combination of instruments. So any size ensemble from 4 players up, and so it could be 4 trombones, or it could be a violin, a trumpet, a clarinet, and a flute. Go. Or it could be a marimba and two cellos and an oboe. That's who's meeting on Tuesday. Depending on, we just wanted to be ready for anything. And so we started doing that. And so several of my pieces I adapted for this sort of flexible or adaptable instrumentation. There's one of them called In C Dorian that's for any instruments, any combination of instruments, and even can involve the human voice. And that got quite a few performances during the pandemic because it was like hyper flexible. Any combination was possible, and it was sort of one of these free form things where the players could choose a lick and play it, and they could go on to another lick and play that lick. There was a conductor giving them a pulse, but they could keep moving from one sort of musical cell to another, sort of like Terry Riley's In C. And so the piece acknowledges Terry Riley's In C. Mine's called In C Dorian. So it's similar to his piece in that way.
Awesome. Well, I definitely recommend our listeners checking this out because the flex band, flex orchestra, I think it's fantastic and a great idea.
Yeah, well, what we didn't know was after the pandemic passed, we hope it's passed, right? is that music is still getting lots of performances because there are so many groups on programs out there where they don't have the full instrumentation. small towns all across this country, and also they were many programs were decimated by the pandemic and are still recovering from it. And so what we are finding is there's still a need for this music, and so I'm happy that the music is still finding use, and the music is helping teachers to do what they do.
Yeah. So you mentioned your career at USC. You were there as a professor for 32 years.
Correct.
Which is amazing. So when you teach composition and you have new students for the first time, how do you start them off? What's sort of the first lesson you want them to get?
Well, the first thing I like to do is I like to have them come in for the first lesson and play something that, for me, a recording, or if they can play it at piano, play it live, something they've written. Even though I will have already heard their music because they had to audition to get into the school and so forth, I like to have them share with me what they consider to be a representation of who they are. It just helps me get to know them, because that's the most important thing for a composition teacher, is to find out who the student is, to help the student find out who they are as well, and then to help them bring out who they are to the best of their ability. So that's what I try to do. The most important thing I do in that first lesson, listening to their music and then asking them lots of questions, which sometimes compels them to dig deeply and to answer the question, to dig deeply into who they are and find out who they are. That's the most important thing we have to do as composers, is find out who we are. Because composing is not about being better than someone else. It's about bringing out who you are, because no one can write your music better than you. And so you have to get to know who you are. And then you're able to offer something that no one else on this planet can offer, something that's uniquely yours, just like a thumbprint. It's unique, and it's something that only you possess. And that's what I start stressing right away from the first lesson, is the importance of not comparing yourself to others, but to spending that energy digging deep into yourself, finding out who you are and bringing that out in your music.
Seems like that could be a challenge and fun experience for a lot of young composers.
It is for those composers, and I was one of them, who hadn't really spent much time thinking about who they are. It can be a challenge at first, because at first you're like, I don't know who I am. I just want to write music, right? That's the way I was, at least.
I'm just a 20-year-old kid, yeah.
I know I enjoy music. I loved playing the trumpet, and now I'm writing music and I want to write it. That's where I was. That's where my head was. And it took a long time for me also to understand the importance of getting beyond just that, because that passion is important, but you have to go beyond just the passion for composing or for music making. And you have to go to that next level, which is, who are you? You're doing this. What are you going to offer, contribute, that no one else can contribute? That's the tricky step. And you're right, it is challenging.
Yeah. All right. Well, I've got one more question for you before we take a quick break. So when you aren't making music, what sort of hobbies do you have to keep you busy?
Well, my wife and I walk a lot every day. That's one thing. And so hiking, we live right here at the foot of a mountain, Mount Wilson, in the San Gabriel Mountains. And so we like to hike. I love that. We love languages. So I spend a lot of time, this is very nerdy, I know, but I spend a lot of time just studying languages, especially Italian. That's my best language, but also German. And then I've also started flirting with Mandarin and starting to speak a little Mandarin, but I'm still pretty bad at that one. But I love language, and our whole family loves languages. All of us. I have a son and a daughter. My wife and I have two kids, Joshua and Hannah, and they also both love languages. So it's just sort of a family passion of ours. So that's another hobby I have.
That's awesome. I'm right with you. I love languages and studying them and figuring out how they work.
Yeah, we're also huge baseball fans. So we go to Dodgers games all the time. Which
very nice.
This was a very disappointing season for us. They have gone so as far as we did, and then not do very well in the playoffs. But we love the Dodgers.
Yeah. I grew up in LA until I was about 12, so the Dodgers were my team.
Oh, yeah. That's great.
All right, well, after we take a quick break, we're going to listen to some of Frank's compositions. Welcome back. This is Steve Danielson. I'm talking today with Dr. Frank Ticheli. We're going to start first today with Earth Song. So this is for SATB a cappella, although you have created instrumental settings of this as well. I have loved the song for years, and I've had several of my own choirs perform it. Most of your works are for orchestra and bands, so where did this choral piece come from?
So, this is my second piece for chorus only. My first one, as I mentioned earlier, was There Will Be Rest. I was already over 40 when I wrote that. So I came to choral music late in life because, being an instrumentalist, but I came to it with a vengeance. And I love writing for chorus now. Earth Song was written during that second Iraq war, the one that went on, that seemed like it was going on forever, when we were all pretty war weary. And it was so it's a prayer for peace, basically, a veiled prayer for peace. And it's also somewhat a little bit of an anti-war protest as well in the text as well. So I wrote the text and said it fairly quickly. And it's set to pre-existing music, actually, that I had written, a piece called Sanctuary. And I took some of that music and adapted it and kept sort of contorting it to fit this text that I had written, and found a way to do it. And so that's the origins of the piece. And it got lots of performances during the pandemic, which although I'm sad about that situation, I'm happy that my music was used in a way that maybe allowed some people to find some solace and healing during that terrible time of the pandemic. It got lots and lots of performances online, virtual performances. There was one done by choruses all around the world. It was very moving to me. Choruses from all over the place sang it and put it together, these kind of virtual things, sort of like Eric Whitacre's virtual choir thing.
Yeah.
This was choruses from all around the world. And I don't know who did it. I don't know who put it all together, but it's really beautiful. And then Voces 8 did it as well, a fabulous choral octet from London. They sang it beautifully as well. So I'm really happy that it got so many performances during the pandemic. And just glad that I took the time to write it, because nobody had commissioned that piece. I just one day said, I'm going to do this, and I wrote it. And it's rare for me to do that, to write a piece without a commission. I just had a little, I remember it was the month of June. I don't remember the year, but I had some free time in the month of June, and I just wrote it.
Wow, that's great. Because, I think it's the sort of the third stanza of the song that I think spoke to a lot of choirs during the pandemic. Would you mind if I read the text
By all
for
means.
our audience? So you wrote this text, correct?
Correct.
All right. So, sing, be, live, see. This dark, stormy hour, the wind it stirs, the scorched earth cries out in vain. O war and power, you blind and blur, the torn heart cries out in pain. But music and singing have been my refuge, and music and singing shall be my light. A light of song shining strong, Alleluia. Through darkness, pain, and strife, I'll sing, be, live, see, peace. Now, when I was working on this with my students this past fall, that third stanza right there, but music and singing have been my refuge, that's what we sort of latched onto and really made a difference for us. So thank you.
I think, thank you. I think that's what resonated for so many singers, is using music as a refuge, and something we could all sort of relate to.
So if it's all right with you, we're going to listen to the a cappella choir and chamber choir at Mountain View High School perform Earth Song from our recent fall concert.
Great.
Our second piece today, Angels in the Architecture for orchestra and solo soprano, and whirlies. So those that don't know what whirlies are, there's big sort of plastic tubes that you whirl above your head to make these awesome pitches. So this piece plays with ideas of contrast of light and darkness. The opening and closing soprano solo builds a sanctuary of light opposed to the turbulent darkness in the orchestra. Tell us more about writing this piece and what went into this structure.
Sure. So Angels in the Architecture was composed for the Sydney Opera House. It was commissioned by an organization called Kingsway International, but specifically for a premiere in Sydney at the Sydney Opera House. So they flew me out a year ahead of time before the premiere just to look at the hall, just to get to know that space, the Sydney Opera House. So that I would be hoping that I would be inspired by that space and compose some. There's an organ there as well, and so forth. They wanted me to just see that. So the first thing I noticed when I got there were these halos, uh, halo shaped, I think acoustical ornaments of some kind. They're just, or maybe just ornaments for ornament's sake, nothing to do with sound. But there were about, I don't know, a couple of dozen of them, different sizes and shapes of halo shaped structures hanging from invisible wire above the stage. I have been told that they have since taken those down. I'd like to think they didn't, but and at the time it was just a beautiful thing. So anyway, I thought, well, there's my title right here. These halos as part of the architecture, but halos in the architecture didn't quite make it work for me. But Angels in the Architecture, that seemed like a really good title, the alliteration and so forth. So I went home with a title and no music. It's rare for me to have the title first. Had to find the music to fit that title. So I started thinking about angels as a representation of goodness and light. And then I needed something. They wanted a piece about 14 minutes long. So I thought, I can't just do 14 minutes of light. I need something for the light to cast its shadow on. So I needed the darkness as well. And so the piece sort of evolved as this conflict between forces of darkness and forces of light. And all the music representing the light is slower tempoed, and some of it is borrowed music. I borrowed thing like Old 100th, you know, that's that one.
Yeah.
And also the Shaker song that begins and ends the whole thing. It's like this protective wall of light, this Shaker song called I Am an Angel of Light, Angel of Light. And it's sung by solo soprano, as you mentioned, off stage. And so that's like a protective wall of light surrounding this piece. And there's also a Hebrew tune, Havenu Shalom Aleichem, that makes a cameo appearance as well. And then my own original chorale. Those four things, original chorale and three borrowed hymns, form the music of light. And then all the fast driving music, and mostly in the minor mode and dark and just driving at you relentlessly. That's all music representing darkness. And the piece just unfolds as this sort of tension between the two forces. That's pretty much what drives the piece.
That's awesome. All right, well, we're going to listen to Angels in the Architecture, performed here by the USC Thornton Wind Ensemble with Frank Ticheli conducting. All right, our third piece today is The Shore for chorus and orchestra. So I heard that this work began with a conversation about Ralph Vaughan Williams' Sea Symphony. Though I know you didn't base The Shore on the piece, I wonder if you could sort of take us from that point through the composition of this piece.
Sure. So this was commissioned by the Pacific Chorale for their conductor, John Alexander, longtime conductor of the Pacific Chorale. He was in his 40th year, and they wanted to commission a work to honor him on his 40th anniversary season. And his favorite piece of all is the Vaughan Williams Sea Symphony. Uh-huh. And so he kept talking to me about the idea of the sea. He was hoping that I would in some way involve the sea in my piece. He commissioned to work for chorus and orchestra. And so I talked with my collaborator, David St. John, who's this dear friend of mine. And we not only collaborated on this piece, but we were collaborators as professors. He's a longtime professor of creative writing at the University of Southern California. And we taught this amazing course together called Writer, Composer, Singer. It's eight poets, 8 composers, 8 singers, all graduate students. So 24 grad students are all collaborating. The poets writing the words, the singers singing them, the composer words, and the singers singing them. And it was just this wonderful class where the students just collaborated. And so David and I had done that for a long time. For 20 years, we taught that course. And we thought, let's also collaborate on a piece. And so David came on board and we collaborated on these poems. It's a series of 4 poems. All of them are set at places where land and water meet. So it's not always just the seashore, because one of the third song is set in Venice. There's no shore there in Venice, but it's certainly a place where land and water meet in a really, really unique way. And that one's called The Black Gondola. This one that you're playing, the second movement called One Shore, is a young man at night looking out at the sea and just waxing nostalgic and reminiscing and sort of expressing kind of philosophical opinions as well about life and about love and about eternity and beauty and mystery. And it's just such a beautiful poem. There are a couple of lines in there that just blew me away. And I was very inspired by David St. John's poetry and grateful to him for providing that poetry.
Yeah. What about the first and fourth movements? What are those?
The first one is a young boy. It's called The Tide Pools and the Boy, and it's a young boy at the shore, and the tide has just rolled out, and it leaves these sort of eddies and these little tide pools where you've got all these. It's like a playground for a young boy, and so that's the setting. Just all this sort of rich play, like what's the word I'm looking for? You're gonna have to edit this. A playground is all I can think of right now. It's like a playground, and you've got all these. You've got sea urchins, and you've got all kinds of different plant life and just things that the sea leaves behind when it rolls out to low tide. And that inspired the first movement.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last movement is now the speaker is now an old man looking out at that same sea. So the speaker's completely changed, and yet that sea is pretty much unchanged.
Uh-huh.
And so it's just this incredible observation on the brevity of human life and and the mysteries of the earth as symbolized by the sea, the earth and nature in general. And also so the whole thing is like a circle. It starts with this young boy and then it goes all the way to this elderly man, and so you get the sense of the life cycle through these four movements.
All right, we are now going to listen to One Shore, which is movement 2 of the shore, performed here by the University of Michigan Choirs and Orchestra. All right, our last piece today, Blue Shades for symphonic winds and percussion. In the front material to the 25th anniversary score of Blue Shades, you talk about how this piece and your relationship with it has changed over the years since its premiere in 1995. So tell us about writing this piece and about its evolution for you.
Sure. So the Blue Shade, Blue Shade was written about 25 years ago, a little more than 25 years ago. It was a consortium commission of something like 30 wind ensembles from all over the country, ranging from really modest, young, rural high school bands all the way up to some of the great, best wind ensembles in the country. So, how would I write a piece that wouldn't bore those top ensembles, but wouldn't leave those more inexperienced ensembles in the dust? How do you do that? And that was a tricky challenge for me. And my solution was to write a piece that kind of left the young ensembles in the dust. But at least I gave them something that would allow them to have fun trying to play the piece. And that's where, because it has so many blues elements and jazz elements in it. That was my solution to this. And so it's a piece that celebrates traditional jazz, the kind of which I grew up hearing as a young boy near New Orleans. And was actually written. Another reason I decided to write it is because I had just written a piece called Playing with Fire for the Jim Cullum Jazz Band and San Antonio Symphony. And that one also is a piece that celebrates traditional jazz. But there was very little room for my own voice. I was writing the piece as a vehicle for this jazz band. And I wanted to revisit this idea of combining jazz and classical elements, but in a way that allowed my own voice to come through. And that's what happened in Blue Shades. So it's an old piece now, 25 years old, but I still conduct it all the time. And I wrote the 25th anniversary edition because, as you mentioned, of my evolving relationship with that piece. Just me as a conductor, I'm influenced by the ensembles I conduct, and in one hall I'm conducting it this way, and another hall that way, and I'm discovering, boy, I wish I'd written that. And why didn't you include string bass, Frank, during the stand-up clarinet solo? That was a dumb thing not to put in. It's screaming for double bass, sort of pizzicato on a walking bass, dum 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 bum 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 bum, that sort of thing. It's not in the original version. It is now in the 25th anniversary edition, and then just things like, I never heard enough horn in one spot. And so I boosted the dynamic, or I'd say bells up, right? Which I don't have in the original. Just things like that to help the players to understand, I really mean it. You've got to bring this out. Or I really screwed up in the first edition. I didn't write this loudly enough. And now here it is written at a better dynamic. Or I wish I'd boosted this passage by adding an extra octave to it, maybe in 4 octaves instead of in 2 octaves, something like that. So all these little things happened in the new edition. That's the thing. Music is this living thing. It evolves. It's breathing. It's alive. And like all living things, it's evolving. And the evolution is shaped not so much by the composers. It's shaped by the conductors and the performers. Mm-hmm. They are the caretakers of the music that they value. And so it's a huge gift and also a huge responsibility that all conductors and performers have as the caretakers of the music that they love. They are the reason it keeps evolving. So it was really Frank Ticheli, the conductor, who had a big influence on the revisions that happened in the 25th anniversary edition of Blue Shades.
That's awesome. And I love how you brought it back to sort of speaking with your voice, with who you are. I mean, that's the lesson that you want your students to know, is to be able to speak with your own voice.
That's right.
All right, well, we are going to listen to Blue Shades, performed here by the University of Michigan Symphony Band. Well, Frank, what are you working on now that you can tell us about?
Well, I've got a piece out there in my studio in the backyard right now. I hear it calling me right now. Come help! I'm almost done. It's a piece I wrote at a place called the McDowell Colony. I wrote the short score. I was there for 6 weeks. Now that I'm retired, I've got more free time. I was at the McDowell Colony from late August to early October. It's a place in Peterborough, New Hampshire, where composers and painters, playwrights, sculptors, filmmakers, poets, all writers, all go to just get away from the world. And you're given a studio in the woods, and they deliver lunch on your doorstep so they don't bother you. And then we meet all at the end of the day after being all completely in solitude all day. We then meet at the end of the day in the main house and break bread together and talk about our day. Oh, I had a terrible day. Oh, I had a good day. Or we play ping pong, or we share our work. We have sort of social release at the end of the day. So it's just almost like utopia for an artist, the McDowell Colony. And there are other places like it, but my favorite of all the artist colonies, my favorite is the McDowell Colony. So I wrote this piece. I don't have a title yet. Tentatively right now, it's called Short Symphony because it's just that. It's in 4 movements. Each movement's only about 3 minutes long, and it follows sort of the format of a symphony, in that there's an opener, there's a slow second movement, there's a 2-minute scherzo, and there's this driving finale at the end. But I don't like the title Short Symphony, so it's probably not going to be called that. We'll have to see. It is for wind ensemble. It's commissioned by San Diego State University. They've got this fund where they can commission they commissioned me to write anything I wanted to write. And so I was just completely free to write whatever I wanted. It's for wind ensemble. That was one restriction. But other than that, it could be any length, it could involve singers. It could involve anything. I just went with these short movements, this short movement form. So that's what I'm working on right now.
That's amazing.
And then after this, I don't know yet. We'll have to see. I did have an extra week at the McDowell Colony. I wrote a choral piece.
Okay.
Again, not commissioned. I just did it for fun. So I'll be submitting that to my publisher soon as well.
All right. Well, we'll be on the lookout for that. So if my listeners want to learn more about you and your music, where are you located online?
Well, my website is one place. It's just Ticheli.com. And other than that, you can just Google my name and you'll find things.
Okay. Well, hey, listeners out there, I know you're sitting at home or in the car or wherever you listen to podcasts, and you're thinking, I wish I knew how to let other people know about this amazing podcast with these amazing composers. Well, guess what? There's a super easy way. Visit the merch store and buy a t-shirt with the Moveable Dough logo on it. T-shirt's not your thing? How about a hoodie, a sticker, phone case, baby onesie, whatever? Get something with the Moveable Dough logo on it so people will see it and want to know more. Follow the link in the show notes or go to sdcompose.com/moveabledough and you'll see a link there as well. Well, Frank, it has been wonderful to get to know you today. Thank you for joining me on Moveable Dough.
My pleasure, Steve. Thank you for having me.
My guest today was composer Dr. Frank Ticheli. If you have a recommendation for a future guest or an idea for the show, please email me at moveabledough@gmail.com. This is Steve Danielson. Keep the music moving.